I'm glad to see so many people interested in young folks. The problem we are to address this morning has to do with the changes in the development of methodologies for the training of young people. Actually, as we all remember, there were days when family life provided a great deal of strength to the members and the children's children to the third and fourth generation. But all this is more or less changed. The great modifying or regulating intensities of the moment are in the hands largely of peer groups of young people themselves and the media. Instead of the individual growing up in a home, he is largely growing up in a pandemonium. Now, this does not mean there are not good homes, but it means there are not enough of them, enough to meet the balance of the changes that society has brought about in the last few years. We think of change in the wrong way, usually. We think of change as something that happens, and then things more or less settle back and go on as they always were. But this is not true. All change of major importance has an enduring effect, and very often changes the entire course of the future of a nation or a family. The main problem we see in such things as the invention of the automobile. The Ford car didn't seem particularly dangerous to anybody. Many thought it would be pretty good to get away from the cruelty to animals of the old days of trucking. No one thought of it except as an invention. But there isn't a single step of history since the invention of that car that has not been influenced and modified by it. Today, as we look at the freeways, they are the long shadow of Ford's flivver. They are something that inevitably happened as a result of a single incident that changed the course of history. Another one of these history-changing incidents was the airplane. This has, to a somewhat lesser degree, affected civilian life, but it has had a tremendous impact upon military procedures. The media, television, motion pictures, each of these things was considered to be something interesting in itself. People became very much involved with it, but no one realized, actually, that the world would never be the same once these inventions come into use. They change the future. They require not only a well-thought-through plan, but they demand from every human being major modifications in personal conduct. The individual can no longer live the way he lived before these changes came about. And in the present century, the rate of change has escalated tremendously. In the year 1900, things were not so different than the way they were in 1850. But by 1950, the change in the century, the whole past had been changed, modified, and a large part of our common policy, conduct, and code became obsolete. Now, in the 16th and early 17th century, Comenius, the Moravian educator, established the concept of the public school. Prior to that time, most schools were in the keeping of the church or of guilds, or for the education of the children of the nobility. Comenius was the one who told Europe that the educational system had to be changed, that there was absolutely necessary for someone, something, some way to protect the moral growth of children. He suggested, as the most reasonable point of view, that those best fitted to tell children the facts of life were their own parents. And in those days this was probably true, for there was comparatively little that was unusual in the life of the individual. He grew up in a community, lived and died there. He perpetuated the business and policies of his fathers and grandfathers. And he bestowed these concepts, opinions, beliefs, and properties upon his children. This has completely changed. Now, this change has brought to focus a number of points that we like to ignore. We like to assume that things will go on as they always have, and that the present will not change the future. That the future that we look for could be 16th or 17th century, but if we want it, we can have it. But the truth is we can't. We cannot go back to a way of life with which we are no longer in any harmony or understanding. So we now had the problem of Comenius and trying to find some way to do something for the public school system. When he came along, there wasn't any, so there were many ways of improving it. But there was a definite pattern of processes. Children learn at home, for the most part. A child in a farming community in 1840 or 50 received only a few months' schooling a year. The rest of the time, the child had to work on the farm with its parents. So the desires of education were simple, and the final end of education was reading, writing, and arithmetic, plus integrity. The schools or the parents' guilds, or whatever constituted education, provided the 3 R's. The only other factor possible was religion. The local church had to do with the spiritual destiny of the farmers and merchants of the communities. This church had as its primary instruction ethics, integrity, and the recognition of a divine power that must be obeyed. This was not difficult to believe in times when there was no real Darwinism in circulation. There were very few agnostics and practically no atheists. The families themselves had religious background. Of course, it would be noticeable then as now that these families did not live their religion too well. They accepted it, supported it, and affirmed it, but largely lived according to the pressures of their own personalities. So Comenius thought the possibility of what was called the mother school, in which the child learned first that which was of most importance, ethics and integrity. It was far better for the child to be a good person than to have a fantastic education which he was going to abuse. Also, no matter how much knowledge descended upon him in the course of centuries, he was still in a position to control that knowledge by ethics. Therefore, the individual had a first line of defense in the ethical instruction which was part of his environmental support. This is largely done away with at the present time. The mother school of Comenius faded away into the public school system. And the public school system has continued to grow in influence, but for some reason that is hard to define, the entire ethical structure has collapsed. It has vanished, faded away. The reason it has faded, no question, is that the success mania, wealth and power and fame have become the principal objectives of human life.